Hello and welcome to Granite's long distance repair training video. My name is Chris. I work in the voice repair department on the escalations team. My goal here today is to teach you everything I know about long distance and make you as comfortable as I am when troubleshooting long distance. The first step to understanding long distance is actually divided into three subjects. I'm going to talk today about the three types of calls there are. I'm going to explain routing and all the components that is included in that. So lattice, picks, and trunks. That's all under the umbrella of routing. We're going to dive into that. And then after that, once we understand the three types of calls and the routing, that's all about that's all background information needed to troubleshoot long distance. So that's what we're going to get into first. We're going to understand how long distance works. We're going to understand the three types of calls there are. We're going to understand the routing of long distance. Once we understand how all of that works, troubleshooting long distance will be just way easier, and it'll be easier to understand. So then we'll get into exactly what we do day to day to fix a long distance issue. Okay, so diving straight into it, we're going to talk about the three types of calls. There's a local call, a long distance call, and a local long distance call. We're going to start with the easy one. We're going to start with local calls. Now, a local call is a call that is made from a central office and terminates to a number within the central office's local calling radius. That's about 15 to 25 miles. The local call is handled by one carrier, the local carrier. So every city has what we call a central office. The central office is responsible for routing and terminating calls within about 15 to 25 miles, in that city. So let's use an example of Brockton. Brockton has a central office, and if any calls are made within 15 to 25 miles of that central office, it's going to be considered a local call. And if that is the case, then the local carrier will be the only one handling that call and will be responsible for routing it and terminating it to its destination. So if a call is made past the local calling radius of a certain city, then it will no longer be considered a local call. So for all intents and purposes, for a local call, just remember this. A local call is just a call that is made within 15 to 25 miles of a central office. So the every central office has a different setting of what they determine a local call is. So for example, if the central office in Brockton says any calls made within 25 miles, that's going to be a local call. As soon as you make a call that's 26 miles to 27 miles, that's no longer considered a local call. Also, another important thing to remember is that calls made between calls made between numbers with the same area codes are not always a local call. So because of the central office rule here of 15 to 25 miles, that's going to be considered a local call. You may be asking, well, okay, we're in Brockton, but what if we're going to make a call that's still in Massachusetts, but maybe it's 50 miles down the road, maybe it's 100 miles down the road, but it's still in Massachusetts? Is that still considered a local call? And the answer is no. That would actually be considered a local long distance call, and I'll dive into that a little further. But as long as a call is within the radius, which is 15 to 25 miles, that's going to be a local call every time. As soon as it passes it, it's going to be considered a local long distance call. So because of that, we can have numbers that have the same area code but aren't considered a local calls. So we can have a number that starts with 617, and I can be calling a number that is 617, but because it's past the 25 miles, it won't be considered a local call. So just remember that when we're troubleshooting. If you see a call sample that has the same area codes, just remember it may or may not be a local call. And we actually do have a tool here that can determine if a call is local or not. We'll be seeing this tool quite often. Again, I'll dive into what all of these other components mean. LADAs, 362, these LADAs, all these confusing terms. I'll further explain what that is. But for now, when we're talking about local, looking at this this tool here, it says local call ? And then it's N. So that we know it N for no. If it was Y, it would be yes. Basically, what we did was we just uploaded our area code and the prefix. We don't need the last four, but it's just 618, 687, 618, 993. and it says, is it a local call? And it's no. And it actually shows us our distance, which is 23 miles. And so we know that maybe the central office that is handling this call, maybe their local calling radius was 15 miles. So if it was, so because it passed that 15-mile threshold, it was actually 23 miles, it won't be considered a local call. It'd actually be considered a local long distance call. And now you may be wondering what exactly is a local long distance call. And all it is just another type of call that I mentioned in the previous slide. So we have local calls, long distance calls, and local long distance calls. I know we just went over what a local call is. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. So we're going to move on to what a long distance call and what a local long distance call is. But actually, before we get into those types of calls, I do want to get into some other terms, and I want to explain further exactly what routing is. I want to explain what trunks are. I want to explain, LATAs and PIC information. Now, this seems like a lot of new information to start off with, but it really is quite simple. I'm just going to break it down. All this is, it's just me explaining how a call routes. How does a call work? We all know what calls are. We all know we can, call my buddy down the road. But how does that work, right? And all calls basically route very similar to each other. Local calls, long distance calls, they route pretty similar. And so I'm just going to break down how a call routes. Once we understand how a call routes and all the components with that, then understanding long distance and local long distance will be way easier. So let's just put a pin for now in this slide, the local long distance and long distance calls. We did cover local calls. We're going to now cover routing, and then we will get back to long distance and local long distance. Okay. Okay, so getting into routing. All calls are routed using what we call trunks. Now, what is a trunk? A trunk is a communications line or a link designed to carry multiple signals or a call simultaneously to provide network access between 2 points. 2 points meaning 2 phones. So all a trunk is, it's the in between, or it's the link that the calls use to travel to one another, right? So when I call my buddy on his phone, the signal of that call is going to be traveling down this trunk. So think of a trunk as a road or a path that a call or a signal travels down to get to its destination. Destination being another phone number. So a trunk, all a trunk is, it's a piece of equipment that allows 2 signals to communicate with each other. 2 signals are, being the phone numbers that we are calling out of, right? So when I make a phone call, there's a signal that is going to be traveling down a trunk, and it's going to travel down to my friend's phone. That phone's going to pick up the signal. And now there's a link between the 2 signals. Each signal is, a phone, and now we can speak. So when you see a trunk, when you see that word trunk, trunking, all that terms, all that information, all we're talking about is the link or the line that is used to carry the signal or that holds the call. So that's all that is. A trunk is basically a path that the call can travel down. Okay, so the next slide here, we're talking about LATAs. Now, each state is divided into multiple LATAs. A LATA is a local access and transport area. Now, all a LATA does is it helps determine routing networks, and it determines if a call is routing on what we call a PIC or an LPIC network. Now, I will get into what a PIC and LPIC network is on the next slide. But for now, we're just going to explain and really understand what a LATA is. So here I have a picture of Massachusetts, and in this picture, Massachusetts is divided into 2 areas. We have a blue area and we have a gray area. So the first thing you want to know, and maybe the most important, is if we're in the blue area, right? Let's say, I don't know if you guys can see it, but there's a word here, and this is just a city. Cambridge, right? Let's just talk about Cambridge. Say we're in Cambridge and we're going to make a call to somebody who is, past state lines, right? If we're going to make a call to someone in California or somewhere across, across the world or across the country, it can even be, New Hampshire. If it's across state lines, that's going to be considered a long distance call, and a long distance call will be handled by two different carriers. That's the biggest difference between a long distance call and a local call. So understanding that, it's the same thing when we cross a lot of lines. So if we cross state lines, it's a long distance call. If we cross a lot of lines, it's also a long distance call. So that's why we can actually make long distance calls within the same state. I used to think if we're in the same state, as long as we're in the same state, it's not going to be long distance, right? Because we're in the same state. It's always going to be local. But that's actually not correct. We can make long distance calls and be in the same state. And what determines that? LADAs. What's a LADA? It's just an area. It's just a designated area that is designed to help determine what network a call is routing over. So if we're in Cambridge and we're going to call somebody still in Massachusetts, but it's going to be Greenfield and it's in the gray area over here, that's going to be considered a long distance call because it's the trunks, the calls are traveling through the trunks past LADA lines, and that's going to be a long distance call. Now, if we make a call, going back to local calls, right? Say we're in Cambridge and we make a call that is within 15 or 25 miles, whatever that radius is determined by Cambridge. If we make a call within that radius, it's going to be a local call. But if we make a call past that radius and it's no longer, past the 25 miles, so we're going to make a call that is 30 miles, right? But it's still within the same LADA, that is what we call a local long distance call. And that's what the difference is. So we have three types of calls. We have a local call that is made within the central office's area, radius. We have a long distance call that is made past LADA lines or state lines. And then we have a local long distance call that is made within the same LADA, but past the central office radius, calling radius. So a local call is going to be routed by one carrier, which is the local carrier, and they're solely responsible for opening the link between the two numbers for communication. A long distance call and a local long distance call are both handled by two carriers, local carrier and a long distance carrier. Basically how those calls work is the local carrier will start the routing. It will route on the local carrier's trunks. It will travel down all the trunks to a certain point, and then it will hand it off to the long distance carrier. So think about that almost as like a relay race. If we have a relay race, we have two runners and there's a baton, right? The first runner runs half of the race, hands off the baton to the second runner. The second runner grabs the baton and finishes the race. It's the same thing for long distance calls and local long distance calls. The local carrier will start the call. It will route it to, halfway, and then it will pass off the call or the baton, to the long distance provider. The long distance provider will now grab that and will finish the call. Okay, so now we will talk about PICs. As mentioned in this bullet point here, LADAs help determine routing networks and determine if a call is routing on a PIC or an LPIC network. What is a PIC and what is an LPIC? Now, a PIC and LPIC, they're actually acronyms, and they stand for this. A PIC stands for Primary Inter-Exchange Carrier, and it is used to route long-distance calls. The LPIC stands for Local Primary Inter-Exchange Carrier, LPIC, and it's used to route local long-distance calls. PICs and LPICs, PICs and LPICs are networks used to route long-distance and local long-distance calls. So, all a PIC or an LPIC is, it's just a 4-digit code, as examples, 0555. It's just a code that identifies what network a call is going to be using when it routes. So just remember this, a long distance call will route over the PIC network, and the local long distance calls will route over the LPIC network. So going back to our slide here, if we're going to make a call and we're in Cambridge and we're going to make a call past LADA lines, to, Pittsfield, what kind of call is that? Correct, that's a long distance call. And that is going to be routed on the PIC network because it's traveling down LATA lines. But if we have a call, that, say we're in Cambridge and we're going to make a call, way down here on the Cape, because that's past the 25 miles for the local calling radius, that's going to be considered a local long distance call, of course. And that is going to be routing over the LPIC network. So just remember that the main difference between the long distance calls and local long distance calls are the PICs that they are routing over. So long distance calls will always be routed on the PIC network, and local long distance calls will always be routed on the LPIC network. And what determines the PIC or the LPIC is the LATAs. So if we're crossing LATAs, that's long distance, it's going to be on PIC. If we're not crossing LATAs, it's going to be LPIC, it's going to be local long distance. So going back to our initial slide here, 3 types of calls. We have local calls that are handled by one carrier, and it's just a call that is made within the local call or within the central office's local calling radius, right? Local call. A long distance call is a call that is made past the LATA lines or state lines, and it's routed on the PIC network. Of course, the last one, local long distance, is also a long distance call. It's also going to be routed, let's go back. A local long distance call is just a call that is routed within the same LATA, but it is going to be past the local calling radius, and it's going to be routing on the LPIC network. So, looking at our local call finder again, kind of going more in depth here, right? Say we get a call sample 618-687, that's the from number, and we're calling to 618-993. So we hit submit. Let's look into it, right? So this example, the from number, the 618-687 number, is originating in Murfreesboro, Illinois, and it says that it's in LATA 362. So we know that it's in Illinois, and we know that it's in the 362 area, right? It's in that LATA. So that's the from. Then it's going to continue on and talk about 618-993. That's the number that we called. That is located in Marion, Illinois, and it's actually in the same LATA, 362. So if you're looking at this page, trying to determine what kind of call this is, if you see that these numbers are different numbers, that means that they're different LATAs, which would mean that the call is routing over different LATAs and it's crossing LATA lines, which would be a long distance call. But if you're seeing it here and it shows that it's 362, and it's the same LATA or the same numbers, that means it's in the same LATA, which would mean that it is now either a local call or a local long distance call. And the only other thing that will determine if it's a local call or a local long distance call is just how far that call is in relation to the central office. And of course, I did mention that central offices differ between each other, and they could have 15 miles or it could be 25 miles. In this case, looks like the call was a total of 23 miles. But if we look at this box, it says, is it a local call? And it's no, it's not a local call. So if you see that it says local call no, because N means no, then we know that it exceeds the central office's calling radius. And in this case, it's 23. The call was 23 miles. So it doesn't actually tell us what that central office local calling radius is, but we can assume we actually know it is at least less than 23 miles. So biggest things to note when the local calling guide is just to look at the LATAs. If they're matching, it's going to be either a local long distance call or a local call. And if it's an N, so if we know, going back, if we have matching LATAs and it's no, that's a local long distance call. If we have matching LATAs and it's a yes, that's a local call. And if the LATAs are not matching at all, that's long distance. Okay, so finally, once we kind of understand routing and the trunks, I know I kind of was already talking about the long distance calls and the local long distance calls, but I do want to show you the slides I made for each call. So a long distance call is a call that routes between two different LATAs, right? And then it also routes over the PIC network. A long distance call is handled by two carriers, the local and a long distance carrier. Of course, remember that a long distance call is going to be started by the local carrier. They're going to, run half the race, and then they're going to pass it off to long distance, and then they'll finish it. Okay, so the next bullet point, it goes a little further in depth, and I do want to explain this. So I know you know that when we're working with local carriers, right? Just if we're working just a regular ticket, a no dial tone ticket, ring no answer kind of ticket, say the local carrier is AT&T, right? We're going to only work with AT&T, right? Because it's a local call, just like any normal, ticket like that. And we have multiple local carriers that we work with. We work with AT&T, we work with Verizon, we work with Quest, CenturyLink. Well, I guess they're the same. But Windstream, we work with a bunch of different local carriers. But when it comes to long distance carriers, here at Granite, we actually only use one long distance carrier to service all of our customers. So that being said, MCI, or Verizon Business, VZB, Verizon Business, is our underlying long distance carrier we use to provide long distance service to our customers. So because a long distance call is going to be routed or is going to be handled by a local carrier and a long distance carrier, what we did here at Granite is we have a contract with MCI, Verizon Business. That's one of the long distance carriers that are out there. We work with them solely to provide long distance service to our customers. So that's good news for us, because when we're troubleshooting a long distance issue, we only have to work with one long distance carrier, and that's Verizon MCI. So if a customer has Granite long distance, if a customer has long distance with us, then we will be working with Verizon MCI every time. And that's important to note as well. Here at Granite, we offer two kinds of services to our customers. We can offer local services, and we can offer long distance services together. Or customers can choose to only have local carrier or local services with us and have long distance services with a different carrier. They can also choose to have long distance carrier or long distance services with us and have local services with someone else. So just remember that, going forward when we're troubleshooting. Also going back, I do want to go back to the pics here. 0555, right? So going back to the pics, you can see an example of the services page here, 0288. That's what it would look like in the services page. And when we're troubleshooting it, I'll show you exactly how to get to this page. I'll show you what everything means in the page. But I just wanted to kind of show a little picture of what it looks like quickly. But going back to pics, because we only use one long distance service provider, which is Verizon MCI, their pick for long distance is always going to be 0555. So that in turn, because we use them for long distance services, that in turn will mean that if a customer has Granite long distance, then that call will be routed over the 0555 pick every single time. So a pick, of course, is just a network that routes calls, right? But there are actually many different kinds of picks, pick codes. Every long distance carrier has their own pick. So AT&T has 0288, CenturyLink has 0432, and Verizon MCI, which we use, has 0555. Okay, so just finishing up this slide here, the local carrier starts the long distance call and routes it through their network until it reaches the handoff point. Long distance MCI will pick it up and will terminate it to the phone number that's being called. The long distance carrier picks up the call from the local and finishes routing the call to the desired destination / phone number. And think of it as a relay race. I know I use that example of like the handoffs. Next, we're going to get into the local long distance calls. We're just going to describe that real quick. I know we kind of went over it, but I do want to show our slides here. So a local long distance call is a call that routes within the same LADA but exceeds the central office's local calling radius. This is why some calls that are made between the same area codes can be considered long distance calls. So that's what I was kind of mentioning in the beginning of this training session is, going back to the local call slide. Calls made between numbers with the same area codes are not always a local call. And I know we talked about that in the local call finder. But so just remember that. So if we get a call sample and they both have the same area codes. The called from number and the called to number are both 617. It's possible that it's local long distance because it could be, I could have a 617 area code in one city, and maybe 50 miles away I could have the same area code. And if we're making calls between those numbers, that's not going to be a local call. So just remember that's very important when we're opening tickets. If we see similar area codes, just take a look at the local calling guide tool and make sure that it's a local call and not a local long distance call. And if it's a local long distance call, then we will work it in a long distance troubleshooting methods. But if we notice that it is actually a local call, then we would just work it like a normal ticket, normal no dial tone kind of ticket. And of course, the local long distance calls, they do route over the LPIC network. And kind of going back on that, so I know I was talking about the PICs. The PICs, Granite LD would be 0555. With LPICs, the local long distance routing network, the local carrier actually kind of determines what local long distance network it'll be using. So it can differ, and it usually does. So the most important thing to look at is, when we're troubleshooting is, we want to know what PIC is 0555. It should be 0555 every time if it's Granite LD. But if you see that LPIC is like showing as like 6500 or 9100 or anything like that, that's okay because that is actually determined by the local carrier. So I just want to make that distinction as well. Of course, and so when we get into troubleshooting, so that's going to be our next step in a moment here. But when we actually get into troubleshooting long distance, we'll start talking about the PICs and the LPICs a little bit more and exactly what to look for and what to look out for. Basically, kind of just getting into it quickly. When we're troubleshooting long distance, basically one of our goals here is to note and understand what the PIC is for a certain line, right? So if we go into an account, a line's having issues calling long distance numbers, we're going to note that it's 0555, right? Basically, all we're doing is we're going to go to the local carrier and say, hey, what PIC do you have? Is it 0555? And they'll say yes, and then that's good. And if they say no, then it's not, and we can proceed as normal. Basically, just think about PICs like this. PICs and LPICs are just the network, or it's the identification code. It's a code that identifies what network we're using. So when lines first come to Granite, we're going to open up a contract, or we're going to open up services with the local carrier. We're going to let them know, like, hey, we want this line, when it calls long distance, we want it to route over 0555. They're going to see that. They're going to be, okay, we're going to program it on our end. So when we're troubleshooting it, we're verifying that information. So PICs and LPICs, I like to really emphasize them because they can be kind of confusing sometimes for new reps. It's like, oh, programming, what kind of information is this? Is it complicated? It's really not. All it is it identifies the kind of network that we're using. And so when troubleshooting, we just want to confirm that network with the local carrier. And so, yeah, so that's just important to remember with PICs. I think we did a good job on going over, routing, just kind of wrapping up what we've learned thus far. We just went over on how long distance works. We covered trunks. We covered, the routing. We covered trunks, LADAs. We covered the PICs. And now we know, the three different kinds of calls. We have local calls, long distance calls, and local long distance calls. All this information is great information to know, just in the back of your mind when working a long distance ticket. So the next thing we're going to actually start talking about is how to actually apply this knowledge to our practical day-to-day responsibilities here at Granite. So that's what we're going to dive into next. And so let's get started. Okay, so welcome to our review of the quiz or the assessment that was sent out. This is something I wanted to address quickly. So I know during the training video I was mentioning I was going to have you guys do the quiz and refer to your notes after the training video is done. it may be worked a little differently. We may, use this as as assessment. We may use this like kind of like a worksheet. So it's possible that we send this to you in the beginning of the training, and we may have you fill it out throughout the course of the training. Either way, it's going to be one of those two things. It's either you're going to watch the training videos and then take this afterwards, using your notes, or filling this out while watching the training video. That will be ironed out later, but one of those two things will occur. Either way, I'm going to record just this session so we can go over the answers. That way, we can fact check or check our answers, check our work. So either way, if we're doing it after the training or if we're doing it during, this is the recording or this is the session we can use to check your answers. So that being said, let's get into the assessment. So I have it divided into 3 sections. I have it divided into understanding LD. So all these questions are going to be related to the first portion of the training, which was understanding long distance and how it works. The second video or the second section of the quiz or assessment is going to be troubleshooting. And that's going to go over the second portion of our training when we discussed how to troubleshoot tickets and different issues. And then the last section for this assessment is going to be just covering any additional information. It's going to cover just varying things, just loose ends that we tied up. So RCF, toll frees, stuff like that, dial arounds, just additional information that's good to know. So that being said, we're going to just dive right into it. So question number 1: what are the 3 types of calls? We have local, long distance, and local long distance. So just remember, when it comes to troubleshooting long distance tickets or just any ticket in general, that there are 3 types of calls. One being local, one being long distance, and the other being local long distance. Question number 2: what is a call that is made from a central office and terminates to a number within the central office's local calling radius? It's about 15 to 25 miles. The answer is a local call. So a local call is a call that is made from the central office, and it will route through trunks, and it will terminate to a different number, within the local calling radius of that central office, so about 15 to 25 miles. Question number 3: what is a call that routes between 2 different LADAs and routes over the PIC network? So this is a call that is going to cross, either state lines or LADA lines, and it's routing over the PIC network. That is a long distance call. Question number 4: what is a call that routes within the same LADA, but it exceeds the central office's local calling radius and routes over the LPIC network? So that answer is going to be a local long distance call. So just remember that 3 different calls: local long distance, and long distance. A local call is just a call that's made within the central office's calling radius. Long distance is made over the PIC network between 2 different LADAs. And then the last one, local long distance, is within the same LADA, but is past the local calling radius. Question number 5: what do we call the piece of equipment that all calls route over and is a communications line/link designed to carry multiple signals simultaneously to provide network access between 2 points? And I did mention it not too long ago here. Yep, that is a trunk. Just remember that trunk is just like I know I use that example, the road or the path that a call is traveling down. Okay, what helps determine routing networks and determines if a call is routing on a PIC or an LPIC network? This one's simple. It's just the LADA. Just remember that LADAs are regions within a state that are divided, amongst, or excuse me, the states are divided into different regions where we call LADAs, and that determines if it's going to be a long distance call or a local long distance call. Mentioned in the previous questions here, if a call is crossing a lot of lines, then that's a long distance call. If it's within the LADA, it's going to be a local long distance as long as it's past the local calling radius. So the LADA will help determine what kind of route it is. Lastly here, we have, what is the 4-digit PIC code used to identify the network that Granite uses to provide LD service? It is also the PIC used by our underlying long-distance carrier, MCI Verizon, and that is 0555. So just remember that 0555 is the PIC network that we most commonly used to provide long distance service to our customers. With that being said, there is a secondary network that we do want to remember, 0222, and that's just for VNet. That is just, campus calling or for different stores within the same country, right? So, but to answer this question, 0555, and then we're still going to remember our secondary network is 0222. But this is primarily the network that we'll be using to route calls. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining me on that one. We are going to now pick up and start the second portion of this, which is the troubleshooting portion. So bear with me. We'll be right back.